Hello, everyone. Welcome. I know folks are just starting to join us, so we will give people, I think, a minute or two here to join us. I wanted to flag a little oddity that Zoom is doing today. You might notice that your avatar name on as you come into the meeting here is labeled with my name, Tucker Berry. If you want, you can go ahead and change that to your actual name, so we can kind of all, I think, sort of follow along with questions in the chat box and yeah, and kind of get a better idea of who we all are here together. So would appreciate if you could swap that out. For those who've just joined us, we'll go ahead and give it maybe one more minute to allow for everyone to have time to log in and join us. And for folks who want to know how to change your name, if you're not sure of how that process works, if you navigate your mouse over to the box displaying like either your name or your face, you can click the ellipses there, the 3 dots box, and a drop-down menu of options will appear, and you should have the opportunity to click rename and change your name there from my name, which again, not sure, that's a bit of a new one for me on Zoom, but would appreciate if you could go ahead and do that, just so that we can all kind of be familiar with each other and make it a little easier to track questions in the chat box. Great, looks like everyone has had some success in doing that. So maybe we'll just, we'll go ahead and get started here. Yeah, all right, so I will share my screen here so everyone can see the presentation. Okay. Does this look right, or can you all still see this box of participants on the side of my screen? Yeah, how do I? All right.
Folks can just move the video like off if they need to, but we can't see that from your screen at all. That's just our individual.
Awesome. Thanks, Gavin. All right, so great. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us today. I am so excited to have everyone because I think it's such a great sign that folks across our community here in Illinois are, answering the call to add new skills to their climate advocacy, and that you all understand the urgency of passing the Clean Energy Jobs Act this year, right? So that we can create good paying jobs here in Illinois, do our part to tackle the climate crisis and other public health crises, and hold utility companies accountable, right? There are a number of things that make this bill so important. All things that my colleague Gavin in a little bit will sort of walk us all through. But yeah, so one of the things that, one of the goals for us here today is to walk through and create a really, I think, accessible environment for us to all learn about what opinion media is, how you can use it to express your opinion and convince sort of friends and neighbors nearby, and who are also maybe readers of the local paper, or who consume news articles through social media about the importance of CEJA. So I know that this is something that can seem sort of intimidating, and my hope is that through walking everybody through, not only what these different tools are, but how to be successful at them, some tips and tricks to implement, some pitfalls to avoid, and some of the really like basic nuts and bolts of CEJA that we will be setting you all up for success. A little bit later in the training, we will actually have some breakout rooms, which will be opportunities for for you to, really kind of get started on a draft of your letter to the editor or op-ed, which is, I think, a pretty exciting opportunity. And so as you, we will have a couple opportunities for question and answer throughout the program, but please do feel free to drop any questions you have into the chat box throughout, or use the raise your hand function if you'd prefer to do that. Our colleague Tanisha will be sort of monitoring the chat and helping us sort of facilitate that throughout. So just want to encourage you to do that, because we really are here to be a resource and to help break this stuff down and make it as easy and accessible as possible. So next, I just want to tell you a little bit more about the organization I work for, the Illinois Environmental Council. We've been around for about 45 years now, working to safeguard Illinois, its people, plants, and animals, and the natural systems on which all life depends. We do that by building power for people in the environment. We also represent over 100 environmental organizations in the state, carry out our mission to advance public policies that create healthy environments across Illinois. And we do that through education, advocacy, and movement building. So that's a little bit about IEC. You can always, you can follow us. You can head to our website and sign up for our email list. That's a really great way to get regular updates on what we're up to. You can also follow us on social media. That's a great place too. So I will now turn it over to my colleague, Tanisha, who will lead us through introductions. And I'll stop sharing my screen for that part.
Everyone, so yeah, thanks again for joining us on this op-ed training. If you haven't had the chance, or your name says you're Tucker Berry and you're a non-fact Tucker, please feel free to hover your mouse over your video. You'll see 3 dots, and if you click on that, you'll get the option to rename. Well, we're also going to get to know each other with introductions. So if you pull up your participation list, you can see all the other people here. And the way we're going to do this is I'll start off introductions with name, location, and why I'm here today, and then I'll pass it on to someone else, and then you'll pass it on to the next person. But don't worry, I'll be here to help if you get stuck. So my name is Tanisha Harris. I'm with the Illinois Environmental Council. I am based in Chicago, and I'm here to help out our wonderful comms director to teach all of you how to write a wonderful op-ed and get it placed in a news outlet. And I am going to kick it to Paloma.
Hi everyone, my name is Paloma. I am also with IEC, and I am here today, similarly to Tanisha, to help you guys all get started on this, help you guys add some toolkit, like tools to your skill sets, and hopefully to help us get CEJA passed. Oh yeah, and I'm gonna pass this off to Gavin.
Afternoon, folks. My name is Gavin Taves. I'm the Energy Policy Director here at Illinois Environmental Council. Very excited to be with my amazing colleagues and all of you wonderful folks here to learn about CEJA and writing a successful op-ed. You're in good hands. I'm based in Chicago, and I will be presenting on the 10,000 foot overview of CEJA policy, and I'm happy to answer any questions in the chat box. So please hit me up there. I will hand it off to a non-IEC person. Let's go to Candace.
Hi, everybody. I'm in Freeport. I'm a member of Northwest Audubon up here, and also we have a local environmental group, the Environmental Study Group, and we have the opportunity every month to write a column on environmental issues in the local paper. So I'm going to be doing one on CEJA in September, so I'd be happy to have some tips. Thank you.
All right, how about Laura next?
I'm Laura Davis. I'm actually with the League of Women Voters, and also we're one of the members within Illinois Environmental Council. And I believe that CEJA really needs to get passed, so I'm happy to contribute. And let's see, if I go across the top, who can I get here? How about Gwen?
right now,
Okay.
and just started a gap year, and I'm really excited to help with like national political campaigns, but also local. And the more I learn about CEJA, the more I'm excited to help promote it.
Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm in Chicago as well. I am with a volunteer with the Chicago chapter of the Sierra Club, and I'm working specifically with their communications team here to learn more skills to get our communications ramped up. And I will pass to Rick.
Rick, I live in Brookfield. I'm a member of the Sierra Club, also a volunteer with the Citizens Climate Lobby. I've written a few letters to the editor, and I've actually gotten one published in a local paper, but I'd like to learn how to do better.
Okay, Mary Beth.
Hi, am I muted? No, I'm not muted. Okay. Hi, I'm Mary Beth Shea. I work for Collective Resource Compost, which is a food scrap hauling company. And we're based in Evanston, and I live in Evanston. I'm also a climate reality leader. So I did the training to do, you all know what that is. Not everybody does. I write for Collective Resource Compost. I write a blog post every month. It lives on our website. It's called Greener Living Inspirations. And I mention IEC in almost every one of them. Like whatever I'm writing about, IEC tends to come up. So because this was, not just because this was IEC sponsored, but because it was about writing, and it seemed like I could learn to write in this way better, and that would be good for everybody.
Thank you. Ryan?
Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Hidden. I'm the Beyond Coal organizer for Sierra Club in Illinois. And I'm just joining today to see if I can steal some secrets on how to train people on writing letters to the editor so I can train my own volunteers. I did invite my volunteers to attend today. I don't see any of them here. I assume they're home already writing letters, but we'll see. So I'll look forward to the training. Let's go with Rachel.
I believe Rachel has gone already.
I always do that.
No, it's fine. That's why I'm here. I'm going to pass it to Janet.
Thank you. I feel like one of those volleyball teams where, you know, you have two captains picking and you're like, pick me. Sorry. Janet Musil. I'm in the southwest suburbs of Chicago, Hickory Hills in particular. I've been active with the American Association of University Women, as well as Sierra Club and Pachamama. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. And we are planning on doing a presentation at a few different sites on the Pachamama issue, and we're finding that those are all interconnecting, especially with the Sierra Club's initiative on helping to, pass the CEJA laws. So been active about that and looking forward to learning about how to be efficient about that as well. I think I'm the last person to be called upon, right?
Well, there are two more people.
Okay.
So we're going to kick it to Amanda, but for the person that just joined whose name says Tucker, if you want to rename yourself, just hover your mouse over your video, hit the three dots, and you can rename yourself. But go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, hi, I'm Amanda Panca. I work as an energy campaign coordinator with Prairie Rivers Network. So I'm in East Central Illinois, about halfway between Decatur and Urbana-Champaign. And I'm tuning in today, kind of similar to Ryan. We hope to do, Prairie Rivers Network hopes to do a similar training for our members and working with other downstate organizations. So if a lot of you kind of that tuned in today like what you heard and want to share with friends, there will be future trainings. So maybe IEC will be able to share that as well. So I won't be able to stay on for the whole time, but Tucker is recording this. So it's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. To the person who's named Tucker, would you like to go ahead? We're doing our names, where we're from, and why we're here today. And if you're talking, you're still on mute. All right, well, we're gonna kick it to the last IEC staff member, Matt. Oh, they came off mute. All right, well, they might be having technical difficulties. Matt, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll get back to our program.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Matt Steffen. I am also with IEC. I'm the Chief of Staff here. I'm based in Chicago. Been with IEC, just celebrated my 7-year anniversary, so been around for a minute now. And I'm here because I enjoy writing, and there's always something to learn, especially in an op-ed. It needs to be so concise, and that's something that I really appreciate, and I find is always a fun challenge with writing, is to make your writing concise and persuasive in as few words as possible. So I feel like whenever I do these trainings, there's always at least one like key tip that I can take away and kind of add to the vault there, to hopefully make myself a better writer overall, but also for this, specific kind of drafting. So I might be popping in and out today. There's another conference running in the background of my computer right now, but yeah, it's good to see everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Matt. So thank you guys for introducing yourselves, and I'm going to give it back to Tucker.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. Such a great group. I am super thrilled. It sounds like we've got some great regional diversity going on too, which is super important because, of course, we're trying to build support for the Clean Energy Jobs Act in every part of the state. So that's great. And speaking of the Clean Energy Jobs Act, I think we'll pitch it over to Gavin Taves. He's the policy director, energy policy director here at IEC, as he mentioned. He will be going over some of the nuts and bolts.
Uh-oh, I think we might have lost him, but yeah. I'm here and I'm ready to.
Gavin, well.
Sorry, Tucker, we lost you for like 10 seconds.
Okay, well, all I did was pitch it over to you, actually, so I think you can take it from here.
I got it, and thank you for the introduction. Okay, great. I'm going to do this. Hopefully it's seamless. Do not pay attention to any of the million links on here. Okay, cool. Can folks see this? Everything good? Is everybody okay? Sorry, I didn't see any thumbs up or anything. We're good? Okay, cool. All right, hello everybody. I'm Gavin, like I introduced myself a moment ago, Energy Policy Director here at IEC, and I'm just gonna give a quick overview of the Clean Energy Jobs Act and how we got here and some of the high level policy that you can highlight in your future op-ed. So starting this off, where are we coming from? In 2016, the Illinois General Assembly passed this bill called the Future Energy Jobs Act. It essentially, in its grand goal, generates $12 to $15 billion in new private investments in Illinois for renewable energy like wind and solar, with these bigger lofty goals of powering 1 million homes with solar and wind energy by 2021, bringing Illinois Solar for All, which provides benefits to disadvantaged and disenfranchised communities, allowing them to participate in the renewable energy economy. And then providing energy savings and lower electricity bills. You may have seen the ComEd discounts on special light bulbs and different appliances. That's part of the of some of the FEJA programs. So one of the biggest parts of the Future Energy Jobs Act, or FEJA, was the job creation and pipeline programs. Here are some slightly outdated numbers, but still rather accurate. There was a 10% growth rate in 2019 in clean energy jobs in Illinois, in large part due to FEJA. We have hundreds of folks that are in the FEJA training programs, getting those folks placed successfully in programs after they graduate. And the completion rate has been in the 80s, and that number has gone up since. So where do we go from here? We know we need continued action on clean energy and climate. Right now, we're dealing with a whole host of crises that require immediate policy intervention and advocacy. What we see from the federal level, there is something called the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission minimum offer price rule. And it's a fancy way of saying the federal government is looking to restructure some of our energy markets, forcing Illinois residents to buy more dirty fuel for energy that they will not use anyway. It's called the capacity market, and this will increase folks' bills by up to $500 million per year. It's a huge part of why CEJA is being proposed to fight some of these big federal policies that aren't good for Illinois consumers and ratepayers, and are definitely not good for the environment. We also know that coal plants are closing across Illinois. We have 4 closures slated for next year. We've seen that 11 coal generating power plants have closed down in the last decade. And a lot of these workers have received a little to no warning of the coal plant closures, little to no support in finding new opportunities. And they've essentially just been left out to dry by these corporations that really are only serving their shareholders. And then a lot of these communities, when they lose a coal plant, lose a giant source of tax revenue for their communities, which helps fund schools and police departments and firefighters, these essential services that every community needs. So we need a plan for these communities that are losing these major coal plants and these natural gas plants. Without intervention right now as well, and this is part of CEJA, the funding streams for certain programs that provide incentives for renewable energy will fall off the cliff. It's called the solar cliff. In order to meet these goals, we need to provide more funding to these programs, and CEJA helps address that as well. It meets the gap. And finally, and most importantly here, the climate crisis needs to be addressed, and Illinois needs to play its part in the global patchwork and fabric of climate intervention that's happening, especially when we see not just a lack of response from the federal government, but an actual backtracking on climate commitments. Illinois in 2019, in July, declared agricultural disasters for every single county across the state due to unprecedented extreme heat. And this is just the beginning of the major consequences that we will face going forward. So this is why we have the Clean Energy Jobs Act. All these folks saw these major issues and decided to act. And again, the time to act is now. This is a bill that includes all Illinoisans, which we'll touch on in a moment. It enacts these much needed climate and health protections, and it's helped spur investment and job creation and economic growth in the communities that are most impacted by disinvestment and pollution. So how did this bill even begin, and how did we find out what Illinoisans needed for some new package of climate and energy legislation? We had this participatory policymaking process, which really makes CEJA unique and extra powerful in the policy landscape in Illinois. We had these listen, lead, share sessions where IEC folks, but a whole bunch of other coalition folks and affiliate members went to every single Senate district across Illinois and sat down with real folks in those communities, not corporate interests, but real community members, and said, what do you need from a climate bill? What are your most pressing environmental concerns? And how can we make a bill that addresses those needs? So, from the very beginning, this is a community-driven process that has been community-driven the whole way through, and has never been, influenced by any major corporations or industry interests. So in February 2019, with all of these wonderful ideas from community members kind of codified into a bill, we introduced the Clean Energy Jobs Act. So what is in the act, and what did we find out from the communities, as well as from the experts that we relied on? There are 4 major policy pillars here. 1, creating these quality jobs and investments in communities across the state. The economic growth component of CEJA, which is why it's called the Clean Energy Jobs Act, is really core to all of this. Economic empowerment, especially for disenfranchised folks, is crucial to passing a bill that has wide popularity across the state. Our second goal is to provide 100% renewable energy, that's solar, wind, by 2050. And 3, to create a carbon-free electric sector by 2030. And this entails ramping down the production of energy from coal and natural gas power plants by 2030 and decommissioning those plants. And finally, to increase the access and availability for electric vehicles, specifically focusing on communities that wouldn't traditionally have access to electric vehicles. And some high level numbers, and I'm going to share these with folks after this, so no need to scribble down these notes. The idea is to provide enough wind and solar to power more than 4 million homes, and bring in $30 billion in private investment to invest in these new coal communities through a series of programs that we'll talk about shortly, and then to remove the equivalent of 1 million gasoline and diesel powered vehicles from roads in Illinois. And as you can see right now, the status of this bill, we have 31 Senate and 55 House co-sponsors, so really, really broad support for the bill. So here are the top line messages that folks like you can include in some of the writing that you might be engaging in soon. For consumers, CEJA is a good idea because it helps save them money. It lowers electricity bills, and it'll help protect Illinois ratepayers from these harmful federal attacks on our own energy sovereignty that we deserve to have control over. And we don't want to prop up fossil fuels because we know it's bad for Illinois ratepayers' pocketbooks, and it's bad for the environment. For jobs in the economy, again, we see all these coal plants closing. There's no plan for these communities, and all these job losses need to be replaced by something. We know that there is major growth in the renewable energy industry, and we want to help incentivize that transition in Illinois in the most just way possible. So we're going to deliver these workforce and small business development programs, specifically focusing on the communities that have either been overburdened by pollution, have been left behind by systemic racism, and or have lost a major asset in their community, like a coal-fired power plant or a natural gas plant. Provide opportunities for those folks to move forward into the clean energy economy. And finally, for public health and the environment, we need to decarbonize. We need to do it as quickly as possible. We need to do it in a way that is fair and just for the folks who need it most. So we need to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and provide a plan to do that, and that's what CEJA does. Here's a quick comparison. I'm not going to go into all these details, but this kind of lays out the comparison between FEJA and CEJA. So you can see here, like 25% clean electricity by 2025 was a major goal of FEJA. It's not ambitious enough, which is why we need CEJA, which requires the 100% renewable energy by 2050 and a more rapid decarbonization of the energy sector. You can see some of the metrics here around funding for the Illinois Solar for All program, and then how CEJA responds. And again, don't scribble any of this down. I'm going to share all the slides with you. So where are we now? And this is a really crucial part to include in any writing, but where are we now in terms of support for the bill and what the political landscape looks like? So first off, it's important to note that CEJA did not pass in the spring. The bill has not passed yet because there were these critical economic stimulus and public health measures that were prioritized. But that doesn't mean that Illinois residents are any less enthusiastic about passing a bold climate bill right now. And we can look at some of the numbers from public support. We have cross-party support. This is incredible for a climate bill. 98% of Democrats, 84% of independents, and 58% of registered Republicans are in support of passing CEJA. An amazing, bipartisan support for an ambitious climate bill. We have multi-region support. Every region across the state shows this plurality of support for CEJA. And finally, there's this urgency that a lot of folks recognize. 74% of people say that CEJA needs to be passed immediately, right now. So what are the next steps for us? Our coalition, the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, which is creating this bill and helping organize these efforts, is engaging with governor's staff in these meetings to help determine what the governor's goals are and how CEJA can interact with that and hopefully lead the process. And then we were building this grassroots advocacy, which is why we're here on this call today, to do legislator outreach, writing op-eds, and build coalition support around passing the Clean Energy Jobs Act this fall in the veto session. And in the fall, going from what we were just talking about, we're going to boost our outreach, boost our mobilization, write these op-eds, and then pass the bill in the veto session, which is the crucial goal. How can you help? There's a lot of stuff here. Following all of the different organizations like Illinois Clean Jobs, which is the coalition group, Illinois Enviro, and then CUB, on all our social media platforms. Looking at the illcleanjobs.org website for all of your fact sheets and information on what's changing with the bill. And then finally, really what's most important here is sharing updates and news and writing these op-eds and using personal narratives to say why CEJA is so important to you and to your life and how it impacts your community. It's a really crucial part of this. There's a lot of petitions we can sign, a lot of events to organize, and always including, something about contacting your state rep or your senators and using the outreach tool that we provide. And yeah, in this last slide, I have included a bunch of resources in the notes section as well. Again, I'll share that with folks so you can read up and get some more support for creating the foundation for your op-ed. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will transition back to Tucker. But yeah, please ask me any questions you need to do in the chat box, and I'll be here for a while to answer. Thanks.
Hey, Gavin, it looks like we do have some questions in the chat. The first one coming from Neural. How does CEJA intersect with the ComEd Exxon bribery scandal? Is there a way to include utility accountability to prevent it in CEJA, or is there any other existing legislation that is going to do so? That's the first question.
Yes, that is a big question, a very important question. Thank you for bringing it up. Yes, there are specific utility accountability measures in CEJA. I can't talk about some of the more recent developments, but there will be a release of a new policy platform at some point in the near future, which I would suggest you go to the illcleanjobs.org to find out about. But yes, we do have existing utility accountability measures in CEJA, and I will share the fact sheet for that shortly that you can use as a reference for countering some of the scandal messaging and saying how CEJA is in bed with the utilities, which has never been the case, but folks like to levy that against us anyway. But yes, I will share the fact sheet shortly.
Thanks. I would also just add to that the Governor Pritzker has come out with his own 8 principles about clean energy, and that includes utility accountability and ethics framework. So we're going to move on to the next question is, do we have a list of supporters for CEJA?
Yes, we do, and our team can provide that as well. I do not have it offhand, but I will make a note of that right now and follow up with the folks on this webinar.
All right, last call for questions. Feel free to drop it in the chat or use the raise hand function. Janet, do you have a question? You're on mute.
There we go. Thank you. I was wondering, since it didn't pass in the spring, do we know who it's up against for the veto section? Like what other bills are being considered since it was nixed in the spring?
Yeah, this is a bit of a tricky question because the landscape is changing with, there's so much going on in Illinois with energy and just our political climate. It's tough to tell exactly what's going to happen. So yes, there are other bills that are floating around. There is the Path to 100 coalition that has an opposing bill. We don't believe that they are going to have a lot of traction because they lack much of the racial equity and community-led platform that we have, and that's really what the governor's office is looking for. But I would suggest looking at the Path to 100 website to look at what they are doing, and it's good to get a sense of that. There are also standalone bills that are not going to pass, just frankly, but they're bills to help prop up specific companies doing that are supporting coal energy, and those aren't important to really mention in any op-ed. So really the main thing here to consider is that CEJA exists. We have a whole coalition behind it. Path to 100 exists. There's a coalition behind it. The governor's team is also pushing to create, they have these priorities that Tanisha just talked about. So they have their own platform, and those are the competing interests. But the major bills are the Path to 100 and CEJA.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, looks like that is all our questions. Also, I dropped some resources in the chat to provide more context to the questions I've been asked before, and I'm gonna give it back to Tucker.
Awesome, thank you so much, Gavin. That was fantastic. I will next pivot back over to sharing my screen here. Okay, can we see that? Thumbs up. Yeah, awesome. All right, so building off of the details that Gavin just walked us through, we're going to next talk about how we talk about CEJA, right? And so the strategies for how we talk about CEJA have been developed, from communications professionals across the environmental movement, across business organizations, and a whole bunch of folks who've been putting their heads together for a couple years now to figure out, how do we convey these things in the most persuasive way, in the way that is most clear and concise. And a key here that you will notice, right, a refrain that you're going to notice across all of these different messages is honest urgency. And for me, that's really important because we always want to be conveying factual, like truth, right? Whether it be our personal experiences of how these issues intersect with our lives, or the nuts and bolts of the bill itself, right? We always want to stay within what is real and what is true. And I think for us in this community and in this effort, that's always one of our strengths. And so we always want to stand by that, I think, to the degree that we can. The urgency piece is the second half of that, right? And so we know that climate is not waiting for humans to wise up and take action, right? And so that being the case, CEJA can't wait either, right? So we need to get this done as quickly as possible. And so what we need to do is always be communicating the urgency of these issues in a way that, again, is honest and that is not, I don't know, we're not trying to incite fear or panic, but we are trying to impart to people just how important these issues are. So that's a theme you'll see across these different messages. And the other thing I'll say about this before we kind of really get into them is that I would encourage you to think about these different frames, is what I'll call them, these different message frames. You can kind of think of them as sort of thematic buckets or topics. Think of them as sort of a menu of options for you to consider and pick, the one or two that resonate most with you, either personally or sort of in your local community, right? Because as you're writing these letters to the editor or op-eds, you're going to be submitting them to local news outlets, local newspapers, right? Or blogs that are writing about and covering issues, close to the heart of your community. And so you want to be picking something that either that you can speak on with some authority, either professional credentials or personal experience, or something that your local community is going to find useful and helpful information. So just keep those things in mind as we go through these. And if you'll bear with me, I'm actually going to kind of, I don't love to do this during presentations, but I'm actually going to read out a good bit of these sort of word for word. I'll do that for a few reasons, because some folks are visual learners, some are audio learners, and because in this case, I would say that words really matter, right? And so what I don't want the takeaway to be is that if you don't regurgitate these messages that we're supplying you with today, that you will somehow be doing a disservice to our efforts, or you will be making some major mistake. It's not that at all. These are just meant to be helpful to you and help guide you. And as Gavin said, like, we'll be providing all of these resources to you after, so you'll have them as a reference to go back to. And it's always okay to kind of like put your spin on these, but just remember that, like, we've chosen these words pretty carefully, because over time in the different communication pieces that we've been putting together, we've determined that these are sort of the most effective. So we want to arm you with that, but we don't mean for it to be too prescriptive or to put you too far into a box. They're, again, just meant to be helpful. So I think of this message on the screen as sort of the most, I think at this moment at least, comprehensive, persuasive, explanatory message of what CEJA is and why it's relevant in this very moment. So I'll go ahead and I'll read it now. So as COVID-19 ravages public health and the economy, the urgency to take action on climate change has never been more clear. Ramping up renewable energy development in our state by committing Illinois to 100% renewable energy by 2050, cutting carbon from the power sector by 2030, reducing pollution from gas and diesel vehicles in the transportation sector, and creating jobs and economic opportunity for every part of Illinois must be part of the new reality going forward. Going back to a dirty, expensive energy sector with few job opportunities is no longer an option. Okay, now we'll get into the more specific sort of message frames. One of them that we use pretty often and was relevant before the COVID-19 pandemic and is certainly relevant now is the concept of strengthening and investing in communities that have long been left behind. That is a core pillar of CEJA, and that's something that's even more relevant now. So I'll go ahead and read these two too as well. And there are going to be a handful of these because, and I would encourage you to consider this frame if you're living in a community that's been particularly hard hit by the pandemic, or if unfortunately, if you have personal experience with setbacks related to it or health issues even, that this may be something for you to consider as a resonant message for you to put forward in a letter to the editor op-ed. So, as Illinois grapples with the unprecedented job losses from the COVID-19 pandemic, CEJA would create jobs without raising taxes or electricity bills. Jobs created by CEJA would be focused especially in communities where workers and small businesses have been hit hardest, predominantly communities of color that have seen disproportionate numbers of COVID cases and deaths, as well as downstate communities left in a lurch by coal plant closures. A couple more economic recovery ones. CEJA will result in more than $30 billion in new private investment in the state of Illinois. And on top of the COVID-19 crisis, we're also facing an unprecedented increase in Illinois electricity bills due to a decision by the Trump administration. The last thing consumers and small businesses need is an electricity bill hike that would be one of the largest in Illinois history. Okay, climate, we've talked about this one a lot. And I think this one is something that a lot of folks are familiar with, and in different parts of the state, this message may be incredibly relevant, right? We saw a lot of the unprecedented flooding that farmers experienced, setting them back in their crop production last year. We've seen last year in July, the hottest month in recorded history, right? So there are a lot of these like different elements that may be relevant to where you live in your community that you can pull out and emphasize a climate message. So a good one here, right, is action on climate cannot wait. The summer of 2019 we suffered the hottest month in recorded history, and extreme weather left all 102 counties in Illinois declared agricultural disaster areas. And I'll refer to this resource later, but the Union of Concerned Scientists has this great killer heat tool that you can look up local data and include that in your message, if you would like, or your letter to the editor. All right, CEJA takes meaningful action on climate, ramping up renewable energy development in our state by committing Illinois to 100% renewable energy by 2050, cutting carbon from the power sector by 2030, and reducing pollution from gas and diesel vehicles in the transportation sector, a familiar message that we've done before. Okay, justice and equity. This is a critical piece of the bill. As Gavin mentioned, it's one of the things that is a major strength for the Clean Energy Jobs Act and really sets this piece of legislation apart from all other climate approaches certainly in the state of Illinois, and in a lot of places is nation leading across the country. So CEJA was created with equity and environmental justice at its core. CEJA would improve air quality, which reduces risk and susceptibility to COVID-19 and helps get people back to work, especially in communities of color and places where coal-fired electricity plants operate. CEJA prioritizes investment in communities of color that have historically been shut out of well-paying career opportunities and exposed to increased levels of pollution. And so this one, there's a lot of different points that you can pull out and emphasize on this particular pillar of the bill. And I think that this is an important message to be conveying, and it is just as much as it is an important value for us to have as a coalition and in our policy goals. So if you would like to learn more about that, and you'll find all kinds of resources on the Illinois Clean Jobs website It's referred to in the materials that we will send after all of this, but there's a great fact sheet that zeroes in on just this issue. Public health, we've touched on this a bit, again, very resonant for a lot of folks right now. Fossil fuel pollution, environmental racism, and climate change are all public health issues addressed by CEJA. That's a huge point. Definitely want to emphasize that. Shifting to a carbon-free power sector by 2030 and 100% renewable energy by 2050, reducing pollution from gas and diesel vehicles will drastically improve the quality of the air we breathe, particularly in frontline communities. And utility accountability. This was one of the first questions that we received. Again, so this is kind of long, and I'll maybe read, I guess maybe this first one. But you know, I will also say that, and as I've mentioned before, as you guys are approaching working on these drafts and stuff, please consider us a resource to run questions by. We'll provide our email addresses at the end and in an email after as well. So just know that, like, we're happy to talk to you about all these things. And if you want to, if this is an issue that you're really interested in, and I know it's one that people are very interested in, we can help you like work out what your draft would look like for this one, because it is a little bit more complicated. But we're happy to help you because, you know, I think it is an important and effective one. So, of course, I mean, we're outraged by the multi-year scheme by ComEd to influence lawmakers through bribery, ghost payrolling, and other illegal activities. Utilities are supposed to serve the people, but for too long, it's been the other way around in Illinois. Utilities and polluters have too often dominated Illinois' energy policies, and the rest of us have paid the price in rate hikes, polluted air, and barriers to good, clean energy jobs. Those days are over now. So yeah, so that's utility accountability. And maybe I'll pause there and see if we have any questions related to messaging before I move on to talking about, you know, what opinion media is, what the differences are between the different types, and some of the strategies for drafting effective opinion media. So let me see if I can check out the chat here. And Tanisha, did I miss anything? Are there any questions so far?
No, there aren't any questions in the chat, but as Tucker said, feel free to put them in there or raise your hand to ask one right now. Okay, looks like you're all good to continue, Tucker.
Awesome, cool, thank you so much. Okay, so like I mentioned, next we'll be talking about a little bit about sort of why are we doing this, right? Like, what is our strategy? Why is opinion media important? Well, as you can tell, we see this as a really critical piece of creating support, a buzz about CEJA. Obviously, as we mentioned, CEJA is incredibly popular, right? And the worst, like, we hate to see when there is a bad editor or a bad op-ed or a letter to the editor that gets published, because it creates the perception that, you know, that more people are opposed to CEJA than there really are. And so obviously we would love to see a world where for every one bad LTE, of which there have not been that letter to the editor, we'll get to acronyms later, for every one bad letter to the editor, there are droves of good ones, right? And so that's part of what part of the role that you can play in helping us do this. Because what we don't want is for the public and policymakers who read these things and keep a pretty close eye on opinion pages to get the misperception that the voices against CEJA are louder than they really are. I see this question from Mary Beth. Do we track the bad ones? We do. We keep a pretty close eye on all of the media coverage related to everything as broad as like clean energy to coverage that the Future Energy Jobs Act continues to get, to coverage that the Clean Energy Jobs Act gets now. And I will say that one of the reasons why we're doing this training is because we've seen an uptick in some of these negative messages. I think it's because everyone feels like the inevitability of passing clean energy legislation is getting closer, right? The governor just put out those principles. And so, you know, our opponents, people who would rather us stick with dirty energy and rather us continue to favor the interests of big industry, are starting to feel that pressure and that heat. And so they're recruiting, in some cases, out-of-state folks. I'll show you some examples of what those look like. These are some brief headlines. You know, some out-of-state folks to submit op-eds to papers saying that this would be a bad thing. these are filled with inaccuracies, false information, misleading information, all things that that we are endeavoring here to combat. And we'll talk about some tips on how to do that effectively as well. But I don't want to paint the picture that that this is an overwhelmingly bad problem. To be honest, I would say that our opponents have been sort of behind the ball on this, and this has been a strategy that we've been working on proactively for months now. So, I think that they're just feeling the heat, and it's up to us to make sure that those negative messages, those antiquated talking points that they're pushing, are drowned out. And that's our goal here. So you can see here a couple samples of some of the published letters that we've worked with folks to submit and get published. Yeah, these are just a couple from this summer, and it's super exciting. I will actually send links to these so that you can actually read through them as you're working on finalizing your drafts. Yes, okay. So maybe I'll pause there too, just to make sure we don't have any further questions on that before I get into some of the tips and tricks of doing this effectively. Give folks a second. Okay, I'll keep trucking here. So, how to do this well. Here are a few things to think about. Well, let me go back. So, wanted to briefly touch in on what is opinion media. When we say that, what are we talking about? We're talking about a section in local newspapers, for the most part, that print 3 different types of opinion pieces, right? So they'll print editorials, which is a statement, a sort of sometimes longer form sort of statement from the newspaper itself, right? A board of folks that they employ to sort of articulate the opinion of the newspaper on matters of the day. So sometimes, right, so those are things that you as a person cannot write and submit. Those are things that they draft themselves and publish through their own publication. Incredibly powerful to get a positive editorial. I can point you in the direction of, for folks looking for examples of those, at the Chicago Sun-Times. They have done an array of just honestly fantastic, timely, great editorials about the importance and urgency of passing specifically the Clean Energy Jobs Act. And they just have, can articulate very well the moral clarity of this issue. So that's a great place to look for those. The next opinion media piece is called an op-ed. It's an opinion editorial. Basically, these are also sort of longer form. There are different length requirements for op-eds, as we call them for short, at all the different newspapers. These are typically written by someone with sort of professional credentials, or somebody who, it has like a title or some sort of notoriety, reason why they would be speaking with authority on a particular issue. So you'll see op-eds submitted by politicians or thought leaders or leaders of various nonprofit organizations, right? These types of folks. And so I would say that if that applies to you and you want to work on an op-ed, I will cover a little bit more in depth how to do that. But I think for us and like the batch of folks that we have here today, I think a lot of us will probably be turning to letters to the editor. I'll talk about those in a second, as the main sort of tactic that's most accessible for us in opinion media. But again, op-eds are incredibly effective. So basically, these folks will write one and submit it. It's a strong statement of sort of their take or their principles, and the paper may work with them on some edits, but pretty much print those as is. And I will say the same kind of goes to that for letters to the editor. Those are submitted pieces from public, right, from readers of the paper on various topics that are sort of in the news and relevant to the day. Those are usually much shorter, much briefer, and to be honest with you, making them a little bit harder to write in some cases than an op-ed, because you've got to pack a real punch in a short amount of space there. So, but yeah, the newspapers will print several of those. If you can always navigate over to their websites and check out. A lot of times it'll be under a tab called opinion. and you can see the different ones. Sometimes they print them in their print editions. They'll also just publish them on their websites in some cases. So those are all places to look. Again, I can kind of package a lot of that together and send over some good examples for you to take a look at as you're considering which ones to do and what you might want to do. And the last thing I'll say here, maybe before we move on to some of the actual tips is that, like, if you've already written a letter to the editor, or you think that you yourself maybe aren't the best voice, same goes for an op-ed, but you do have somebody in mind, think about that too as we're going through these things, because again, we do need to engage as many people as possible in this effort. And also, like, sometimes maybe you don't feel called to do this necessarily. You want to learn more about it, but you do know you've got somebody in the back of your mind that would be a great fit for this. I would say, like, you should maybe after this training connect with them and see if they would be willing to do it. I'm happy to be put in touch with folks and that you think might be a really good fit for this type of project, and we can work with obviously either you or them to kind of like help recruit other people to do this. Let's see that there's a question. Okay, are op-eds generally invited? Sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't. I can't really say that I've ever noticed a trend one way or the other. Pretty equally done. I will say for folks maybe I'll save my more specific tips for op-eds when we get to that section. I'll move on. Okay, so yes, so these are some general sort of tactics that you might find some success in doing, right? So one thing I want to encourage you to do is to remember that you should be writing for your audience. And who is that, right? Well, what's tricky here is that your audience is sort of two different groups at one time. It is both sort of broadly the public, folks who are just readers of the newspaper, people, your friends and neighbors and people in the community near you. And you want to be writing in a way that is accessible to them, right? So you don't want to be necessarily like including super wonky terms or jargon and expecting people who aren't familiar with that to have any interest in following your piece, right? Really engaging with thoughts on that topic. You don't want to lose folks, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But at the same time, you're also writing for policymakers, legislators, politicians, and their staff who keep a very close eye on these. Folks in those positions think of the opinion pages as sort of as accurate as this is, and I think there's some debate about that, but like, as sort of a pulse of the community to get a sense of what people care about and what people are so concerned about that they're willing to write into the newspaper about, which I think for them is a pretty strong statement about how important something is to someone. The other tip we've mentioned before is to try to stick in with your talking points, right? Don't get too far off the rails. Refer back to some of the messages that I mentioned earlier, and don't let yourself get too carried away with distracting concepts or topics that stray too far from the point you're trying to make. And I would say to that point too, I think a lot of times we maybe get a little enticed by trying to communicate the importance of something by really leaning heavily into data and statistics and things like that. And I can just tell you sort of in my experience as a communications professional that while that is effective sometimes, I would be careful to avoid that pitfall because you can really easily lose people. You got to remember, right? You are competing with a whole bunch of distractions and competition for people's time, from everything from TikTok to changing the baby, and people are short on time, and luckily letters to the editor are short, so you can be really effective and I think keep folks' attention. But yeah, so I would encourage you to pick one or two data points that you think might be the most effective. I also think a cool and creative strategy for dealing with that particular tactic sometimes is to use what's called like social math, right? Which is where you would refer to an Olympic-sized swimming pool worth of water, right? Rather than 660,000 gallons of water, to kind of communicate in terms that people understand, something that is tactile, something that people have experienced. The the information or the numbers that you're trying to impart. Another winning strategy here is to sort of anchor your letter as in response to an article or another letter or op-ed or editorial that the newspaper has published. You don't want to spend too much time talking about the opponent's, if say it's an opposing piece or whatever, or even just an article stating matter of the fact, right? Something about flooding in the community or whatever. You don't want to spend too much time referring to that, but I have noticed, and I think this is sort of conventional wisdom, that the editorial folks who make decisions about what gets printed and what doesn't really like to think of opinion sections in the newspaper as sort of in conversation with one another. So this is where they think of as like a dialogue happening. And so when you can say like, I read, Tucker Berry's piece on the flooding from the, I don't know, whatever road, right? And the local business is impacted. And it really struck me that we have an opportunity to do something about it. We need to take action on climate. We need to pass the Clean Energy Jobs Act. Here's why the Clean Energy Jobs Act would improve upon this problem that we're experiencing just last week in our community, right? And then you move on and you talk about the bill. So, or you talk about the topic that you're trying to really hone in on. So I would say do a little stop in referring to that article and then move on. And then I think the last tip I have here is that, and I think it goes really well with that one, which is that you want to be sort of timely, right? Remember that like you're looking for examples, or okay, we'll call them we call them in the business, we call them hooks, right? Like you're looking for a hook that is sort of really relevant and timely to yourself and the community around you, the readers who will be like reading your piece. And that's all to, not just to get their attention, but to keep it, right? So that you're writing something that's relevant to them. Let's see. And then I also wanted to just say, in terms of, and this is probably a question we'll get, I've noticed this in other trainings like this before, folks are often want to know, okay, so I just saw a terrible op-ed or a terrible letter to the editor full of misinformation about climate change or about the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and how do I respond to that? And our advice is that, you really want to be careful about giving more airtime or credibility to misinformation and your opponent's message, right? So rather than reiterate word for word some of the problematic things that they've expressed, you just want to say, like, they got the facts wrong about flooding impacts. Here's what really happened, or here's what we really know. And just quickly pivot to your talking points and the message that you want to make sure people read. You do not want people to read over and over again the opposition's message, right? So just be careful not to give that more life and more airtime than it deserves. And I think that this is, it's hard to do because, listen, even for me personally, I am very often, I feel defensive about this policy. It's so important, right? We've been working on this for years and at this point, and I am very irritated when I read things that are just flatly false and people know that it is, and it is hard not to be goaded into going at length about why they're wrong and the ways in which they're wrong and how messed up it is, like what they've said. But that is not in most cases, most savvy or persuasive thing to do. So I guess what I'm saying is, take it from me, do your best to withstand the temptation to do that, because I feel you, and it's hard to avoid, but we must do it. Okay, so I think that's a lot of the sort of the tips and tricks there. Let's see, sometimes I lost my, sorry, give me 1 second, here we go. Yeah, okay, so letters to the editor. Like I said, these are a lot shorter, sometimes, typically in about the 250 to 300 word limit. again, I think we've covered most of this. You know, you want to be responding to an article in the paper or something, a recent event, something like that. You want to be sharing your experience and speaking from your personal experience, and that's what gives you credibility to talk about these issues, right? Or your professional capacity. That's also a super relevant one and a good one for this. You always want to be writing in your own words. You do not want, like a lot of times you'll see organizations, and I think this is helpful, right? Hand out like a sample of what a letter to the editor would be, and that's great. And I think that you should, oftentimes you should use those and rely on those as a guidepost for what your letter could look like and include. But form letters like that, if submitted as is, are rarely published, and you'll be better served by putting in a little effort and changing it up. Happy to, like, again, as it relates to CEJA or even other environmental issues that IEC supports, work with you on that. So always feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, and let's see. When you submit, you always want to include your contact information. When I say submit, like when you pop over to the, let's say it is the Daily Herald, you pop over to their website, you look up their requirements for submitting a letter to the editor. They're like, and by that I mean the word limit, or, you know, and what other information about you that you need to include. Sometimes they'll ask you for a photo of yourself or your name and the city that you live in, and that type of stuff. So just know that you may have to have some of that on hand. And if you ever, this goes for people who are interested in writing op-eds as well. If you would like help in approaching those people or making that connection, I'm also happy to help do that. I'm happy to help connect you via email to these folks and broach the topic of, you know, submitting this letter and asking them to publish it. And then op-eds, like I said, I don't know how super relevant that these are for our whole group here. It sounds like most of us are probably going to be focusing in on letters to the editor, but here's some tips on those. The main thing I just want to point out, which I think is a common thing that people don't know about op-eds, is that you cannot submit the same piece to multiple publications. That is very frowned upon, and they will get mad at you if you do that. So just know that it has to be something that is originally yours and something that you are only submitting to one place. And know that, you know, they might want to go back and forth with you about making some edits, and, you know, that's up to you how comfortable you are with what they might be asking you to change, and, you know, and perhaps you would want to take it to another outlet instead. And then, you know, maybe the last thing about op-eds is that if you draft a whole op-ed and it doesn't end up getting placed for whatever reason, and there are different reasons why newspapers reject them, some are frustrating and some make sense. That content is great to reuse for other things. You can always post it on social media. You can post it as a Medium piece, right, or a blog post. You can do any number of things with that material. So don't think of it as a wasted effort. If you end up getting rejected, if you submit an op-ed and you get rejected and you want to chat with me about what else you can do with it, what you can repurpose it into, I would love to talk with you about that, because that is a reality. It's happened to me before. It happens to the best of us, I would say, and that does not mean that all efforts are lost or wasted. Okay. Yep, covered that. That's basically just, like I was saying, social media or other blogs. Think about, you know, maybe you want to talk about the impacts of climate on future generations and children, or asthma in children, right? Mom blogs, there are a ton of them. Like, you can think out of the box about where you might want to submit some of these things, and happy to talk with folks about what some of those options are as well. Okay, I think I will stop. I will answer any questions you might have about all of that. Appreciate you guys all sticking with me on that one. I know that was kind of a long haul. And then Tanisha will lead us in breaking up into breakout groups.
Yeah, so we just got a question from Janet in the chat. Have you generated a list of what the opponents have claimed so we can be prepared to rebut if we're not directly responding to a previous LP?
Interesting. We don't really have a formal list of that, because I think those of us who've kind of been working on this stuff have, I think, probably a pretty good sense just in our heads about what those things are. I think the need hasn't really come up, and I'll tell you why. If you are not directly responding to an opposing op-ed or something like that, I would discourage you from going through the list of arguments that opponents are making and we're sort of refuting them, either one-offs or even one by one, right? I think the real estate that you get in an opinion media piece, right, which is so great to have. It's free. You don't have to engage with reporters. You don't have to, so there's no like other side interviews included. It's just such a valuable tool. And when you have that, you want to use it to get the maximum punch you can to deliver your message, the positive message, what we know is effective and important to convey about CEJA. So I would say, like, it maybe isn't the most strategic to spend any time, especially if you're not responding directly to a bad piece, on what the haters are saying.
Any other questions before we move on? And this will not be your last opportunity to ask questions. All right, so we're about to do breakout sessions, which is a good way to have smaller groups, help people open up. And the way it's gonna go is that all the breakout groups have been pre-assigned. You're going to be put in with a couple of other people and a facilitator. The facilitators will be one of IEC staff, and we are going to start answering some questions, but also you're gonna start writing and using some of the wonderful tips that Tucker just gave to you to start working on your own sample piece of what type of opinion media you might be using. We're going to be in these sections for maybe 30-ish minutes. And again, there'll be a facilitator in there. We're not leaving you by yourself. And our other facilitators will help you work through this. We'll also provide the questions, and the questions will also be in the chat. So you're going to get a box pop up on your screen that says join breakout groups. Just make sure you hit that box so you can be sent to your breakout room. Also, Tucker, Neural says
Yes.
thank you for hosting. So.
Oh, well, thank you. This has been a pleasure. And if you'll bear with me, I just want to make sure we have the right. Yes. Okay, cool. We've got it all set up. So you guys should be being sent to your rooms now. Together if we can. Does anybody want to share with us any of that? You can raise your hand, and we can call on you that way, I think. Bill, I see your hand raised.
All right, I'll do one. Give everybody else some time. Start writing now. You've got 10 seconds. I just got one sentence. This time, the coming clean energy revolution must include those frontline communities that had been run over by the dirty fossil fuel expansion and explosions. It might be
I like it.
Much. But.
No, I think you got to remember. You're competing for against a lot of things, and it's very hard to overstate the critical nature of that issue. All right. Thank you so much for being the guinea pig, Bill. Anybody else?
I'll go if you want.
Yeah, thanks, Laura.
I'll follow Bill. I'm usually following Bill anyway. We know each other. Actually, I put two in. First one I just did an overall with CEJA. I said the time is right. Illinois has taken an innovative approach to support jobs, drive the state's economic recovery, and move to protect our residents from the worst effects of climate change through the Clean Energy Jobs Act. CEJA is a grassroots developed bill that responds to the greatest concerns of Illinois residents and is supported by 82% of voters. CEJA has bipartisan support throughout the state and offers training programs for workers and contractors to accelerate renewable energy growth, particularly people in communities impacted by coal plant closures and loss of other manufacturing business. Through CEJA, Illinois will achieve a carbon-free electricity sector by 2030 and 100% renewable energy by 2050. The time to pass CEJA is now. Ask your legislators to support CEJA HB 2132 and HB 3624. And then the other one I started writing was more particular to weather change and humidity and our impacts, how we experience it in our own home. But
yeah, that's interesting. All right, well, I think that first one's, you're very well on your way. And I would say now, I think you're probably just keeping an eagle eye out. Yeah. See, Sandy's giving you a round of applause.
How would you change it?
I would say what you really need is probably maybe either some kind of, and I think you're trying to get at that angle with the second one that you're working on, but some sort of practical impact, like either some bad thing that's happening now that, like specifically, that this is a solution for, or pull out like maybe a jewel specifically from CEJA that is like a cool highlight that you want to draw attention to, that's maybe a lesser known one or something like that. And then the other thing is, I honestly think you're in pretty good shape there. I think really what you're keeping an eagle eye out for some kind of article or, breaking news story or even, one thing we talked about in our small group, which is a good one that's relevant right now that folks might want to use, is that the governor just last week announced those 8 clean energy principles.
Sure.
So I think that would be a good kind of hook for what makes it newsworthy. I think that's really what you're looking for.
Okay.
Yeah, great start.
I could go.
Yes, Mary Beth, go ahead.
I was typing furiously, like Bill said. Okay, so my hook, my beginner part is, a lot of you, like me, are looking for ways to address racism. For most of us, that has come in the form of reading books and watching movies. And while that's important on a personal level, it's even more important to create a more just society through policy change. Tucker helped.
Yeah. Well done.
Thanks, folks. How about, yeah, there we go. I was going to say, how about one more?
Sure, okay. And as many of you have heard this again. With the CEJA bill, the state of Illinois has the opportunity to become national leaders of a new industrial revolution with clean energy job creation at no additional cost to the consumer by reallocating funds that from the current capacity market portion of our present electric bills.
I like that.
Finish the sentence.
There you go.
Yeah.
One thing that occurred to me in hearing it the second time is you might want to change CEJA, and this goes for everyone, over in the first time you mention it, to the full name of the bill.
Got it.
All of us, yeah, we all know what we mean by that, but yeah, there you go.
And I think it's super confusing that there was FEJA and there is CEJA. Like, come on, we couldn't call it something a little more different?
It doesn't help that I believe CEJA might be the same spelling for the word eyebrows in Spanish. So,
it is. Eyebrow in Spanish.
Yeah, if you ever look at like just the CEJA hashtag on like Instagram, you'll get a lot of honestly fabulously done eyebrows, but very little connection to clean energy futures. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was so great. Thank you, everyone who shared. I have a couple little announcements, and then I think we do have a little bit of time for any final questions that folks have. So wanted to emphasize just once more that, think of us as a resource, and additionally, not just for in your drafting and your questions, but if you are planning to submit something, I'm asking that you let me know when you submit and where, if you do so, just so I can keep an eye out for it. And share those as they get published more broadly with the people who are interested in these. And I think the more of them that we collect, the more, the less intimidating this process feels as people continue to go through these trainings from now through the veto session, which is the upcoming legislative session. And with that, also that, so this iteration of this training is the third so far in a series of the ones that we're trying to do roughly every 2 weeks now through that veto session. So if you found this valuable, you can, we'll be advertising when the next ones will be. Each different organizations in the coalition have led different ones. So some of our other friends, I think like Amanda from Prairie Rivers mentioned, will be leading others in the future. So this opportunity is available for other volunteers and friends and such that who might be interested. And then, yes, Janet reminded me that for those of you who are interested in doing social media stuff more related to CEJA, you should be using the hashtag CEJA can't wait, and that is the word can't, the contraction for cannot, without the apostrophe. You cannot use punctuation in hashtags, it breaks them. So a little tip there, because it will truncate it if you include it, and then, well, hard to be a part of the conversation that way. So yeah, just encouraging folks to use that, hashtag CEJA can't wait. And let's see. I think that's it. Like I said, I will follow up with a bunch of the resources that we talked about, including the slides. I sent around a toolkit yesterday to everybody who had registered as of yesterday. So I know that doesn't capture quite everyone. I will include that again. It's a great summary of a lot of the things that we talked about today. It will also include some of the requirements as of July. Sometimes they change for like word limits and stuff like that, and the different people to reach out to at most of the papers around the state, just to kind of give you a sense of what you might be looking at for the publications that you're interested in. And I think that's it. Yeah, and I know a couple of you had some other more specific resources that you requested. So I think between Gavin and I think we made note of those. But if I missed something, please don't feel any hesitation in being like, hey, you said you would send this, or whatever. And also we recorded this, so I'll send this recording too, so you can always refer back to it, and you're welcome to share it with other people in our CEJA universe who want to see a clean energy future. And I think that's everything. Any final questions from folks? No? Going once. Great. Okay. I think that's it. Oh, you know what I didn't do? I didn't share my email address. It was on like the final slide or whatever. So I'll put it in here, but like I said, I'll follow up over the next day or so with these resources that I've mentioned. But that's my email address. It's just my first name, Tucker, at ilenviro, ILENVIRO.org. And you can find me on our website too, which should be easy to get to from Google. So that's it.
One quick question.
Yeah, sure, Rick, what you got?
What's the number of the House bill or Senate bill for CEJA?
Oh, you're trying to stump me. Man, do you know, Tanisha, off the top of your head?
I'm actually pulling out CEJA right now. This is half of it.
Tanisha has a giant binder of it. You guys, it's pretty
This
impressive.
is only 300 pages of the other binder got left at the office. It's HB 3624, and I'll put that in the chat as well. HB 3624, and if you put that into ilga.gov, and you might have to look on the second page of the search results they give you, you can see all of the co-sponsors and the of July 2019 version of the bill.
Thank you.
There you go. And Laura posted the Senate version as well. Yep.
Oh, thanks, Laura. Tag
Thank you,
team.
Laura. Yep. Awesome. Cool. Thanks so much, everybody. I really do appreciate it. And listen, like I said, because this is a series, if there are things you think we didn't cover that we should have, or outstanding questions that you've got, we really do have an opportunity to improve upon this as we go forward. And I'm happy to share that feedback with my colleagues at other organizations that are going to be taking up this going forward. So please definitely let me know if you see any areas for improvement. I know we would really appreciate it. And I think that's it. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you.